Hi, and welcome to PACER's presentation of resolving disagreements through the special education process. My name is Pat Anderson, and I am one of the senior advocates at PACER Center, and I will be doing the presentation today along with my coworker Rachel, who's going to try and keep track of questions coming in and out. And hopefully, as we go through the presentation, when you have those questions, if you just want to write them out in the question box or the message box, I'm not quite sure what it says, and Rachel will relay those questions to me. So again, welcome. I'm glad you joined us today. And we're first going to start with a little bit about PACER Center and what we're doing here today. This is going to be a presentation that talks a lot about resolving disagreements with the school district through that special education process, but it's also going to include a lot of information on how you as a parent or a professional could be working on your own communication skills and how that can lead to much better interactions with that IEP team. So for beginners, just so you know, there is going to be a link for a survey following the presentation so that we can get feedback from you to make sure we're providing information that's useful to you and also gives you an opportunity to be able to give us feedback if there are some other topics that you think would be very helpful for us to be working on. There also will be available a link to a certificate of attendance at the completion of this webinar. So a little bit about PACER and how we came about is that when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act came about, it was determined that every state would have what's called a Parent Training and Information Center. That's what PACER Center has been here in the state of Minnesota since 1978. I also want you to be aware, I noticed that we had a lot of people register from other states. When I'm talking about statutes and rules, I'm going to be speaking specifically about Minnesota. So what you may want to do if you have questions and need to know specifically more about your state that you're calling from, I would encourage you to contact your state designated Parent Training and Information Center. And if you're unfamiliar with who that is, if you were to contact us at PACER, we can provide you with that information. So as I said, PACER is the state designated Parent Training Center here in Minnesota. Our funding is all provided through government grants and contracts and fundraising because we are a nonprofit organization. We work with parents throughout the state of Minnesota. Our most services are free of charge to parents. And as an advocate, our main role is to help you as a parent understand what your rights and your child's rights are through this special education process. As a parent, we don't necessarily know that information. And so what the training centers are encouraged to do is to provide that information to parents in parent-friendly terminology. Most of us don't have an education in special education, and so being able to talk with or get the information needed to help us as a parent be that best advocate for our child. So currently here in Minnesota, we have about 18 advocates who do a lot of our consultation with parents over the phone. Unfortunately, with the COVID situation that's going on, we're a little more limited in our involvement, but fortunately to the internet, we're able to access certain types of meetings with parents, and actually we'll talk a little more about that later on in the presentation. So Minnesota, PACER is your Minnesota resource We do our presentations right now are being done as we're doing today through GoToWebinar. Typically, when we're not in the pandemic situation, we do cover the entire state of Minnesota, and our workshops are presented in person. But we'll all just kind of have to get used to this new normal for right now. But we are your resource. Call us anytime. When you registered for the workshop, you should have been informed about PACER packet. Well, it's not a packet, but what we've included is a link to all the related handouts that we typically would put in that packet. So make sure you click on that link and get, if you haven't already, and get a copy of the handouts that we feel are pertinent to this specific presentation. Also, we encourage you to check out our website, because in addition to this presentation, which will be posted on there, many of our other ones are on. You can access those at your leisure. And then also check out the links to our resources, which you can either, many of them you're able to print right off of the computer, or you can contact PACER, and we will be more than happy to send them out to you. So if I didn't mention it at the end of this presentation, and I think I did mention it, there's going to be that link that's going to be sent to you with the evaluation form. That provides us with information that we're able to share with the Minnesota Department of Education. As you can see from this first PowerPoint picture, you know, our project is funded partially through the Minnesota Department of Education. So we need to share information with them as to how many people attended, how the presentation was accepted, and any ideas that you as parents or professionals out there in the community have that you may want to share with us. So one thing we also like to do with our workshops is provide you with lots of tips and tools, because again, as a parent, nobody knows your child better than you do, but you may not know how to approach things. So one of the first tips we want to share with you is that knowledge is power only if you choose to use it. So risk it. Use the information you get, because that in itself is going to make you a much better advocate for your child. Okay, I'm trying to get my PowerPoint. There it goes. We've kind of talked a little bit here already about PACER Center. Parents Helping Parents is a program that Rachel and I are involved with, and that's direct communication with parents. Typically what happens, a parent will call our main PACER number, and our secretaries will take some initial information, phone number, name, and just brief details. And then those messages are sent to the advocates, who, one by one, we start making the calls and connect. One of the other programs at PACER is our Simon Technology Center, which has just been a really big help to many parents in the state of Minnesota, and I think throughout the country too. When we are able to participate in person, parents and their children can come in and try equipment, have a consultation with one of our specialists, and just see how many more opportunities a student will have when they have access to the right assistive technology. The Count Me In Puppets are a great program that we have actual life-size puppets and puppeteers who put on presentations for community organizations and schools, and they talk about things like, what's it like to be a kid with a disability and be in the school setting. And so if that's something you might be interested in, you may want to contact them through our webpage also. PACER Center, we're not going to say we have the answer to everything, but if we don't have the answer, we're going to know who to connect you with. And that's part of being that coalition of disability groups. And so again, if we don't have the answer, we're going to have some resources for you so that you can get that information you need. Again, in order to advocate for your child with the disability, you need to know who to contact and how to go about the process. Being a parent organization, it's also important to us that we do have parents on our board of directors, and so they keep active in how things proceed at Pacer Center. So that's a little bit about us, but I think we need to get into the nitty-gritty of what we're here for today. And so what we're going to do, we're going to start out with some parents' rights. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and the Minnesota laws have given parents specific methods to resolve differences or disagreements regarding your child's education. So there's both state and federal laws that give you as a parent specific rights in this process. And part of those rights are ways to resolve differences. And so later on in the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more about them. We'll provide you with information and tips to improve your communication skills before, during, and after those disagreements, because all three of those are very important steps that parents need to know. Disagreements are going to happen, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's how these disagreements are handled that can make the difference. And so we're hoping with some of the tips and tools and things we discussed today that it's going to help you as a parent get through those disagreements in the future. So as a parent, you do have the right to disagree with anything being proposed by the district, and we want to be able to help you do that in a more productive and effective way. So again, keep in mind, if you have questions on anything that I'm talking about, feel free to send out a message, and Rachel will see that we get that. Okay, so we're going to move on here.
And Pat, I'm just going to speak to one question that came in early regarding this being a Minnesota-specific presentation. You already spoke to that, but the parent is asking, are there applications across states?
I'm not quite sure. Is that a question about the student being in school in another state, or?
That's all the information we have from the question.
Okay. Whoever sent the question, if they could possibly elaborate a little bit more on that, that might be helpful, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, so then partnerships. One thing I always want to stress with families is that when you're in the process of an individualized education program, that IEP, parents are equal partners. I'm also going to tell you, I personally feel parents are a much more powerful member on that team, because you're the only one that can give written permission for things to move forward or for things to stop. So we're going to talk about that a little more later on. But what I want to talk about with partnership, you are the person that has the daily relationship with the child. You're also going to be the only continuous team member on this IEP team. Your child is going to move from teacher to teacher, grade level to grade level, school to school, and there's always going to be changes happening. You are that consistent person that knows, hey, I remember last year we tried that, it didn't work. Maybe we can try it again and see if we get a different reaction this year. Nobody else is going to know that information except you as a parent. I had mentioned earlier the right to give consent. That's also one of the biggest things, because without your written permission, they're not able to move forward with things. And again, we'll talk more about that when we talk about prior written notice. But what we're doing here is we're building a relationship based on mutual interest and equal status when we're talking partnerships. I don't know if you ever heard of a baseball player named Casey Stengel. He once said, it's easy to get good players, getting them to play together, that's the hard part. I don't want it to sound like this is a game or anything, but it's a situation where everybody needs to come together in the best interest of the child so that we're all looking at the same thing down the road. So one thing, or a couple of things we want parents to remember, your knowledge and opinions are valuable, but also keep in mind, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? That's always an interesting question for people to think about. So again, as I said, as parents, you're the only one who has that in-depth, long-term daily relationship with your child. Again, you're the only continuous person on the team, and you as a parent are the only one that have the right to give that consent. So later on, again, we're going to talk about prior written notice and a consent form. Things to remember, if this is a request for an initial evaluation or an IEP, the school can't move forward until you've given them that written consent. For any follow-up IEPs, any revisions or reevaluations that happen, then once that prior written notice is sent to you, you have 14 calendar days to agree or disagree with that proposal. Again, we're going to talk a little more in depth about prior written notice a little later on. The other thing PACER strongly encourages that everything be in writing and that you keep a copy for your records. One of the things we've developed to help parents with that is something called a special education record keeping file. And you can order those online on PACER's website, or if you give PACER a call, someone can mail one out to you. And what it is, it just helps you organize your paperwork for the current school year. So a copy of the evaluation, a copy of the IEP, progress reports, any other pertinent information that you feel would be helpful to help you plan for your child's education. As a parent, you can learn new skills to communicate clearly and assertively. And so again, like I said, our publications are available online or by calling. Most of them are free of charge to parents in the state of Minnesota. But talking about partnerships, again, it takes time, effort, and a commitment to build that collaborative relationship. Excuse me. Partners don't always agree, but they do try to work in everybody's best interest. And in this situation, especially for your child. As parents in school teams, we can do that too. So I want to talk a little bit more on this topic. So let's take a look at how partners work together. Rachel, did we have any other questions?
No, the clarification from the parent who asked the original question is just regarding if this presentation has applications on a national level for people who are hearing you.
Okay, in response to that is, I think the communication skills are extremely important. And I think would be beneficial for anyone, no matter what state you're in, because again, you're trying to establish that relationship with the school staff to help you be better able to interact with your child's team and get across your concerns. Those are going to be national. So I think it would be pertinent for anyone, no matter what state you're in. Okay, so partners working together. Think about any business you can. The owners of that business typically are going to be sharing the same goals, may have some individual roles, but yet ultimately those roles are going to support what those goals are, share authority. Each person may have a different set of skills, which can be very beneficial. Partners sign agreements and come together how they solve problems. So when you think about a school setting and the special education process, you and the school share the same goals. You want an effective and appropriate education for your child with a disability. Again, the different roles, you as a parent, you know your role. The school's role is to provide that appropriate education for your child. Share authority. That again goes back to rules and regulations where you as a parent, your handwritten decision, either agreeing or disagreeing, is showing authority. And yet on the other hand, the school has the determination as to what methodology they might use within their district. So, there's everybody with their own individual roles and what their role involves. The different skill sets, again, sure, when you think about it, teachers go to school to teach, want to learn how to work with kids, not only our general education students, but also our children with special education needs. So signing agreements, that's what that IEP is. That's a signed agreement that the team has determined these are the services that the child needs, and therefore we all agree these are the supports that we're going to provide. And then problem solving. Every time you call an IEP meeting, you're more than likely looking at trying to solve those problems. Other things about partners working together, partners want a win-win situation. That's what parents in schools should be looking at achieving also. And so talking about how you can reach that mutual goal of that appropriate education for your child. So it's kind of like running a business of educating your child. So there is always going to be conflicting interests, different perspectives and views of the child. Most parents naturally want what is best for their child, while the school's only required to provide the appropriate services so that your child can make progress towards their IEP goals and also within the general curriculum. So keeping track of that. I mentioned earlier, as a parent, you have that long-term investment in your child. You see them on that day-to-day and year-to-year basis. What we see at home with our child may not be what the school staff see. Different environments, we see different interactions. So it's not unusual for us as advocates to get a call that says, the school's telling me my child is climbing the walls and jumping on chairs. Well, they don't do that at home. Well, again, different expectations in each of those settings. So, disagreements can arise on that. Expectations, again, like I said, may be different at home. As a parent, you may feel that something is important for your child to learn, yet the school has to teach according to the curriculum that's been established for them. So disagreements frequently can arise from that. When you think about it, educators have a shorter investment time, typically 9 months out of the year from kindergarten until graduation, to teach them what the state has determined are the requirements for your child. They also have the expertise in the areas of educating and working with children. So, keeping the focus on the needs of the child is really important. Using effective communication skills, interacting respectively. We don't have to like the people we're working with, but we do have to interact respectfully and be able to express our concerns to them as parents and see what kind of an impact that has on things. Nobody has all the answers. You know, we need to be open to new ideas and try to see things from someone else's perspective. Sometimes that can be very difficult, but as parents, we need to learn to do that. And we need to keep in mind that our perceptions are also influenced by our differing values, beliefs, emotional reactions. Oh, I got really emotional at my son's IEP meetings, and I had to learn to control that because I found we didn't get very far. If I was sitting there crying and my husband, who didn't have a clue what was going on, just sat there. And so learning how to control that within myself so that I could be more productive in those meetings, that was a really big step to take. And then also cultural backgrounds. These are all things that need to be taken into consideration. So how can we approach things to try and avoid those conflicts or disagreements? It's a good question. So being able to disagree without being disagreeable. Sometimes just the terminology that we use can make a difference in how meetings go. And just because we disagree with someone, it doesn't mean that we're right and that the other person is wrong. So data can be really important when we're talking through disagreements, because if you have information that, let's say, supports the fact that, you know, a year ago your child was reading at a first grade level and this year they're still reading at a first grade level, well, I'm sure there's going to be some disagreements about that. So this, you know, discuss that data in determining factors that can help solve some of those agreements. You know, set aside opinions and use factual data. Something I always tell parents through workshops is keep your eye on the prize. Sometimes we may get a little distracted with where things are going or where our feelings are within us. So keep your eye on the prize. And what is that prize? It's an appropriate education for your child. Okay. So when we're looking at these disagreements, you know, we don't want those disagreements to interfere with our child's progress or our continued partnership with the school, because unless you're planning on moving, you're going to have to figure out a process or a way to be able to work with the specific school staff in the best interest of your child, and let them know, you know, okay, we disagree on this, but I really want to work it out. Because again, in the end, it's your child that's going to benefit. So apologize if needed. It's a hard thing to do, but sometimes we have to. If the issues are your responsibility, accept responsibility for it and figure out what do we need to do to get things moving forward. You know, prioritizing your concerns. One of the things PACER offers is something called a IEP team meeting planner. And what it does is it helps you sit down and specifically write out what your concerns are, how you prioritize them. You know, if you only have half an hour, 45 minutes for an IEP meeting, you want to make sure that your biggest concerns get addressed. So prioritize them and move forward. Okay. Not everything is worth disagreeing with. That may sound strange, but think about it. Is it going to make a difference if you bring it up or not? Will what I'm doing get what my child needs? That's a question I'd like every parent to think about as far as their approach if you're in a disagreement. Remember, it's not what I want for my child, but what does my child need? Always make sure that any disagreements come back to what are the child's needs. That's where the evaluation is so important. because it's through the evaluation process that your child's needs are going to be identified, and then those are the needs that the school has to address through the special ed process. Other things with disagreements, stick to the facts and make sure your facts are accurate. And I mentioned earlier, using data to support your concerns. It's hard to deny data if it's in front of you. If you're being told your child's making progress, but yet you're not seeing it at home, sharing that information, sharing the kind of work that your child is doing at home, and see, does it compare to what they're doing in school? And is it an improvement over what they were doing last year? If not, that's a concern, and that's one of those disagreements that you'd want to try and resolve as soon as possible. So anytime you're in the process, if an agreement is reached, make sure that solutions get put in writing. Identify who's going to do it and when it'll be done. Set dates and when and if a follow-up meeting needs to be had. That sometimes can really help resolve some of those disagreements. It's called accountability. As parents, we want to see that someone is being accountable for doing what they say they're going to do, and how to go about that. And then also, bring an open mind to finding a resolution. Discuss options, get input from everybody. Remember, it's a team. It's not a them against us. It's a team. We're all here in the best interest of the child. So let's look at options, and be willing to consider what others might have to say in the situation. So sometimes even using a compromise or a trial period as a key to resolution, such as, let's try this and see how it goes. So maybe you decide you're going to provide a specific service. We're going to try it for 6 weeks. What are the parameters? What might that look like? And then who's going to be gathering the data so that we have information and understand better what actually happened and how the child responded to the intervention. And then also make sure you schedule another meeting to take a look at that information and see, because that then you're setting those timelines, you're making people accountable, and then we're all going to get back together so that we can see how did that intervention work, and is it something we want to incorporate into the IEP. Now, during this pandemic and heightened attention to systemic racism, things may look and be addressed somewhat differently. And we're going to discuss that a little bit more later on when we talk about attending IEP meetings. But be sure that if there are any changes made, any resolution to anything, make sure that it gets written in the IEP and ask for a copy of the revised IEP so that you've got the most current one. And remember that not one person has all of the answers. It's always a team looking at what are the options. So what we're going to do next is we're just going to kind of take a look at you as a parent. So take a look at yourself. Assess your current skills. How have school meetings gone for you so far? Have you kind of felt you weren't very effective, or were you the type of parent that says, well, they're the school teachers, they know what to do, I'm just going to go along with them? And then you get home and kind of go, oh, wait a minute, that didn't sound right. So, assess your current skills. Are you able to get support that you feel your child needs with how you're addressing the issues with the school? Can I, as a parent, approach things differently? And are you comfortable doing that? If not, you may need to learn some new skills. Again, always remember, you know your child better than anybody else. So assess your attitude. I always chuckle at this one because I have an older brother who in this day and age would have definitely been diagnosed with ADHD and thought school was a pain in the you know what and wasn't going to have anything to do with that. Well, along comes his son after having 3 very knowledgeable daughters, and the son has the same attitude as his dad and couldn't figure out why is this. So thinking about that, do you feel it's an us against them situation, or do you feel like the school staff know everything and you know nothing? Or maybe just the opposite. That's how my brother was. He was just the opposite until fortunately I was able to talk with him and his wife and explain, here's the process with special education. And the hope is that we're all going to be able to work together to make this work for BJ. And it did. He finally did graduate from high school. So looking at the problem, talking about what options are to resolve it, and then choosing what seems to be the most appropriate and moving forward with it. So your attitude can have a tough time. Excuse me, not a tough time. Your attitude can impact your interactions with the rest of the team. So again, did you have a difficult time in school? It certainly can have an impact on your attitude now. Our feelings don't have to control our behavior. We don't need to be friends, I told you that earlier, but we need to be able to work effectively together. So then assess, what is it that you as a parent need to learn? How can I be more effective? Do I need to know more about the IEP process? Do I need to know more about how my child's disability is impacting their education? We may, if you've seen one child on the autism spectrum, you've seen one child on the autism spectrum. So look at your child specifically. What's the impact that their disability is having on their education? It's going to be different for every child. Again, that evaluation information, the needs that are identified through there is really important. So if you know more one approach to a situation, will it make a difference? It might. So again, we've got to be willing to look at other options. We may know what works for our child in our home setting, but the school may find that it doesn't work or isn't able to work the same there. So we may have to take a look at some different things. So I always like to use the example of a mobile. Let's just say there was a mobile hanging in the middle of the room and it's totally still until you touch one piece of that mobile. What happens? Everything starts to move. Can be the same way with our communication skills. Sometimes just one change in how we present a question or how we look at a staff member can make the change in the interactions. From my own experience, I had a teacher one day who at our IEP meeting, he kept calling me mom. He was sitting right next to me and he tapped me on my shoulder and he'd say, "What do you think of that, mom?" And I finally got to the point where I just looked at him and I said, "I'm sorry, I don't recall ever giving birth to you. I'm not your mom. Call me Pat, call me Mrs. Anderson, just don't call me mom." Everybody kind of just looked around at each other and I started laughing, and so did everybody else. It made a complete change in the interactions at that table. I finally felt like I was being respected as a parent, and it helped me feel a little more comfortable. So sometimes humor can be appropriate. Make sure you know your group that you're using the humor with, though. And you as a parent have the power to make changes. That's a pretty profound statement. You as a parent have the power to make changes. So we're going to take a look at ways we can explore that, but I just want to check in with Rachel. Any questions coming up?
So far, it's pretty quiet in the question box.
All righty, great. Thanks, Rachel. All right, so let's move on to some of those communication skills. Some people may look at this presentation and say, well, that's pretty basic stuff. Well, you know what? Sometimes we need to be reminded that we need to step back to basics. So with listening, the whole goal of listening is to understand. Take notes. If you have a difficult time taking notes while you're listening, you can invite someone to come along with you who can be taking those notes for you. So just a little tip there. When you're listening, always allow the other person to finish speaking, because you will get your chance. You have your opportunity to bring up concerns and comments. So ask questions to clarify anything that you don't understand. There's absolutely no way as a parent you can make an informed decision on your child's education if you don't understand what the school team is talking about. Okay? You don't have to agree, but you do need to listen. And then try to focus on what others are saying and not your response. I can remember sitting at IEP meetings initially for my son, and they'd be talking away, telling me we're going to do this and that. And in my mind, my brain's going, yeah, right. I've tried it at home. It's not going to work. Yeah, those personal thoughts, you got to sometimes push them to the side. Listen to what's being said. Then ask your questions. So one of the most important things is when you're asking questions, you can't ask a question if you don't understand the terminology that they're using. So if I was to sit here and say, it would appear to me that we need to do an FBA and see about writing a PBIP before we can start looking at ALCs. As a parent, if you don't know what that terminology is that they're talking about, you certainly can't make a decision. So you need to make sure that you know an FBA is a functional behavioral assessment. PBIP is a positive behavior intervention plan, and that an ALC is an alternative learning center. So asking questions is vital. Unless you have a degree in special education, you may not know why the school is proposing something. So the what, who, when, where, and how are really key questions. You know, as a parent, you need to have and understand that same information that the school staff has in order to make that informed decision. If it's a district policy or a special education law or rule that's being mentioned and you aren't familiar with it, ask for a copy of it. If the district is proposing to change the amount of time for a service, ask for the data that they're basing that decision on. Ask that opinions be labeled as such, and it's okay to ask, is that an opinion or is there data supporting that? People are entitled to their opinions, but we don't want to base our child's services on an opinion. You want it to be data. That's where, too, as parents, we count on the educational professionals to provide us with that information. And then ask for rephrasing, clarification, and definition so that you understand. In the packet of handouts that's posted on the webinar, there are a couple of handouts, one called Use Questions to Find Answers, and it just kind of helps you be able to phrase some questions that you might have. And then there's also a handout on top 10 tips ideas to improve parent to professional communication that was developed by the PACER advocates. And again, our publications that are listed on the website, including most of our booklets, are all written by the advocates at PACER Center, of which I think right at the moment, every one of us is a parent of a child with a disability. So not only did we work it every day, but we also lived it. So we've been there and done it. And we do like to share some of our experience with you as parents so that you know you're not out there alone, and it's happening to all of us. So we all have to start somewhere. And excuse me, here are some more of those helpful phrases. A question just as simple as, tell me more about whatever it is they're proposing. How might that interact with my child, or what might that look like during the course of the day? Again, in order to make an informed decision as to appropriate services for your child, these are some of the questions you're going to ask. When you're writing goals and objectives, knowing how are you going to measure that progress? They have to be able to report progress. So you want to make sure you know what your child's baseline is. That's the starting point. And where do we expect them to be in a 1-year period? Because that's what the IEP is written for. And so if we don't know what their beginning level is, how can we determine where we expect them to be in a 1-year period? So that's a question you want to know. Who's going to be responsible for following through to make sure this happens? As a parent, that was always a question I wanted to know. You can sit here and tell me these things, but I need to know that this is going to be followed through with, who's going to do it, and how is that information going to be relayed back to me? So questions like, what do you anticipate the outcome of this intervention to be? What is the hope? What do we hope to gain by doing this? How will sending Mary home teach her what is acceptable behavior in the classroom? To me, that sounds more like teaching her that if she misbehaves, she gets to go home. So what kinds of things can we put in place to prevent that from happening? Or there's always the one of, I think I heard you say, and then repeat whatever it was. Is that correct? Again, making sure that you understand what's being said. So those are some verbal communications that can be happening with the team. Written communications can be a completely different process. So the very first thing you want to do is clarify how you're going to communicate with your child's teacher. What method are we going to use? Is it going to be in an email? Is it going to be in a home to school notebook? Or maybe it's a phone log. But with that written communication, identifying how we're going to do it, how often we're going to do it, and if there's a time of day that works the best. So as a parent, one of the first things you may want to do is let your child's case manager know what's the best way to communicate with you. Is it through written communication? Would that home to school notebook be something that would be helpful? Or do you expect an email at the end of the school day to let you know how things went? Keeping in mind that your child isn't the only child that the teacher has to communicate with families on. So being reasonable with that. But there may be pertinent things that you do need to know on a daily basis. So figure out, how is that communication going to happen? Phone logs. One of the links I gave you in the handouts is something called Working Together, a parent's guide to parent and professional partnership and communication within special education. And in that book, we have a sample of a contact log on page 29 that lets you put in the date, the person called, and just a little summary of what the conversation was. So again, something to just help you stay a little bit more organized. And also, I had mentioned earlier the IEP team meeting planner. There's a copy of that on page 30 and 31, and you can make as many photocopies of these publications that we have in here as you need, and we encourage you to. We're putting them out there so you get the information that will help you. Meeting notes, that sometimes can be an issue. So one of the things we encourage parents is when you sit down at your IEP meeting, ask, will someone be taking notes at the meeting so that we have a copy of what the discussion was and how we're going to proceed with things, and request a copy of it. If they don't take notes or say, nope, nobody's going to do that, you yourself can, or as I said, somebody else you can bring along with you that may just want to take the notes for you. Thank you letters. I never thought I'd write a thank you letter to a teacher, but I have to share that actually it was one of my son's paraprofessionals from elementary school who she just kind of seemed to take that extra step every time she interacted with my son. And I just finally, when we left the elementary school, I told Zach, we're going to sit down and we're going to send a letter and thank her for all that she's done for him during his time in elementary school. And my son is now 33 years old, and he still has connections with this para. They get together every few months and have lunch together. So something like that made a connection, and that connection has lasted over many years. So just wanted to share that with you. Formal letters also. The thing to keep in mind with formal letters, you want to make sure it's being sent to the person who has the authority to make a difference. So when we're talking about special education issues, typically your case manager is going to be your first communication person. If you find that issues aren't getting resolved, then you have the option of moving up to the director of special education for the school district. If you don't know who that person is, PACER has listings, and there's also a connection on the Minnesota Department of Education's website that lists all the directors of special education. So make sure the letter's going to someone who can make a decision. Be brief, businesslike, and of course respectful. Focus on one or two issues. If you send a letter, a formal letter that's 3 or 4 pages long, some things might get lost in the translation or misinterpreted. So sometimes even I say, just write bullet points. These are my concerns. Can you help me in resolving the issues? Set a deadline as to when you expect a reply. Minnesota best practice will say you should get a response within 14 calendar days. If you don't, an option you have is to send a second letter referencing the first and saying, I didn't get a response in 14 calendar days. Please reply within 5 school days. If you don't get a response, it may be time to file a complaint. And of course, we're going to talk about complaints a little later on too. So any of the documentation, any of your written communication, make sure you keep copies so you have have it in your record keeping folder that you're going to order from PACER too. So, and the other big thing is check your child's backpack. Maybe not every day, but boy, I'd be checking it a couple of times, because you know how the end of the school day is, whether it's elementary, junior high, or high school, everything gets stuffed in the backpack, and who knows what might be in there. So make sure you check that out. Okay, so let's take a look now at preparing for IEP meetings. Know the purpose of the meeting. There's nothing worse than walking into a meeting and being blindsided. So even though they don't necessarily have to provide an agenda, I would certainly, as a parent, be asking, do we have a specific agenda? And then if you as a parent have some specific concerns, make sure that information gets included in the agenda. So knowing who's going to be there. Again, you don't want any surprises. And so you too don't want to surprise the school. So know who's going to be there, what their role is. And then also, if you are bringing someone with you to the meeting, you want to make sure that you let them know ahead of time. Don't bring surprises, because you wouldn't want the school to surprise you. I talked about the IEP meeting planner already. Again, that can be found on page 30 of the Working Together booklet. Set priorities. Sometimes we're limited again in the amount of time we've got for IEP meetings. So make sure the issues that are your biggest concern are addressed first, and then you can move on from there. If you run out of time, and sometimes it happens, it's a good time to say something like, hey, we're all right here. Let's pull out our calendars right now. We need to schedule a follow-up or a second meeting so that we can address the rest of the issues that we didn't have time for today. So you've got everybody there. Get that commitment right then and there. And also, when you're going to that meeting, find any supporting data that helps address what your concerns are, because then you're able to share that with the team and everybody's kind of referencing the same information. So know the purpose of the meeting, who's going to be there, and know that if all the issues don't get resolved, schedule another meeting. Do it right then and there if at all possible. Now, during the COVID-19 things are pretty hectic for everybody, or any other unusual circumstances that arise. Meetings may look different, and many of them are needing to be held virtually. We're a perfect example of that today. So, inform the school of any technical issues you may have, and what technology may work best for you. Today we're using GoToMeeting, and I'm quite impressed with it. It seems to be working well. But there's other things like Zoom, or do you need it just by phone? We know in greater Minnesota, internet connections are an issue. And I mean, sometimes it can even impact the phone services. So make sure you let them know what works the best for you. The IEP team may also have to look at more creative approaches to programming for your child. If you're in the middle of a hybrid model, or in situations where they're still doing all distance learning, how are those services being provided? So being creative with how that is done sometimes has to be looked at. So when we go into an IEP meeting prepared, we as parents can be more confident in getting answers to our questions, which in turn are going to help support our child's education. So even after we prepare for a meeting, we might still encounter situations in which we disagree with the school. In Minnesota, we have various options for resolving disagreements, and we're going to take a look at those now. Any questions, Rachel?
Still quiet in the chat box.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're moving forward then. So a lot of these procedures are procedures that came about through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So they are procedures that can be used in any state. But again, I want to make sure that you're aware that we're going to be specifically talking about Minnesota for a couple of them, because well, one particularly is unique to Minnesota only, but the other due process options should be available in other states. But again, you want to connect with your Parent Training and Information Center to see specifically how they go about things. Just as a quick thought on that, when IDEA was written, this was the federal law that determined the rights for our children with special education. What happens with them from there is it goes to each state, and each state is going to make a determination based on the federal law as to how they're going to implement those things within their state. And that's why sometimes, what might be going on in Wisconsin, we don't do here in Minnesota, or we might be doing something that they're doing out in California, but yet they're not doing some of the things we are. So they still have to follow the federal law, but the state can make some determinations as long as they're still meeting the federal guidelines. Okay, so we've got informal methods, conciliation, mediation, facilitated team meetings, due process complaints, which could go to hearings, state complaints, and civil rights complaints. There's no specific order that you need to use when accessing these options. You may have an informal meeting following an IEP meeting and say, boy, our last IEP meeting, I thought we talked about this, but I don't see it reflected in the IEP. Case manager might say, yep, you're right. Let's rewrite that and we'll send it out to you again. That would be an example of an informal method. And if that resolution wasn't reached, if it was determined, well, no, if the school says, oh, we don't recall that at all, you may want to look at one of the other procedures to try and resolve that. So by understanding more about each option, you're going to be able to make a better informed decision about which one is going to work best for you and your child in any particular situation or set of issues. So before we talk about those individual options for resolving disagreements, I want to talk about this special education form that I mentioned earlier, that prior written notice.
Pat, could I
Yes.
jump in? We have a great question for you.
Okay.
How do you handle it when you ask what something looks like and teachers and administration say, trust the process?
Very good question. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for whoever asked that. Well, as a parent, you got a couple options here. Number one is if you don't have enough information on what that process is, I'd be asking a whole lot of questions. I would want to understand much better, what does it look like? I don't trust the process. That's why we're in the situation we're in right now. So clarify that for me. Tell me a little bit more about how the school plans on doing whatever the procedure is. So by asking those questions, I stressed earlier how important it is to ask questions. And don't hesitate to use this statement. I can't make an informed decision unless I understand what it is you're proposing. I think that is probably one of the best statements that you can use, okay? Now, on the other hand, sometimes it's okay to say, we don't know how the student's going to react to it. So that may be a time you say, well, here's what we're going to do. Let's try this, but I want to set it up for a specific amount of time. I want specific data to be gathered during that time. And then we're going to get back together as a team to take a look at how did this work? Is it effective? And if it is, let's move forward with it. Hopefully that answered that question. If not, feel free to give PACER a call and talk further about it with one of the advocates. That's what we do all day long, besides writing new publications and developing new workshops. Our main primary goal is to give you, the parents, the power to make those educational decisions for your child. Okay, so we're going to go back to this prior written notice. So anytime a district proposes or refuses to initiate or change anything to do with identification, evaluation, educational placement of a student, or the provision of FAPE. Remember FAPE, it's a big key word right now. That's free, appropriate public education. And when we say appropriate, we mean appropriate based on your child's needs. So FAPE is a term you're going to hear a lot in the special ed process, especially right now with the situation of how schools are educating, because what might be working for one child might not for another. And so again, it's kind of back to that FAPE, free appropriate public education, is specific for each child. Okay, so anytime they're talking about changing or not changing, the district needs to provide you with a prior written notice. All right, that notice has to include the action that the district is proposing or refusing, why the district proposes or refuses it. It has to explain other options that were considered and why they were rejected. There must be a basis for that proposal or refusal, and then any other factors that may have been involved in the decision making. So again, anytime the district is proposing to do something, so maybe they're proposing they're going to increase the amount of services that your child's going to receive, or maybe they refused your request for a reevaluation. They have to explain why. So that's what that notice has to describe. Okay. So we're going to look now at each one of those individual due process option procedures. You know, I kind of talked a little bit about the informal method already. And so there, you know, sometimes you may just need some clarification as to what's being proposed. You get your proposed IEP and your prior written notice, and maybe it just doesn't quite make sense to you. So reread your child's IEP or the evaluation report. Talk with the case manager. Let them know, you know, something just doesn't quite seem right to you. Sometimes just a simple call to the case manager. You know, hey, Susie, I know when we were at the meeting, the team, everyone at the table agreed Johnny needs special education busing. He's just really struggling on the general ed bus. So special ed transportation was going to be written in, but yet I don't see it reflected in the IEP. You know, the case manager might just say, oh, I remember that discussion. You're right. My mistake. Let me rewrite that page and I'll send it back out to you. Issue resolved. So it can be done that way. As parents, you also have the option to request a meeting with the appropriate IEP team members if you're in disagreement with the proposal that you received. So if it's a little bigger things, if the goals and objectives didn't quite come out the way you wanted, you can still request just an informal meeting with those specific people to readdress the issue. So when agreements are reached or the school offers something, PACER strongly recommends, again, that these things be put in writing. If it's related to the IEP and providing FAPE for a child, we encourage that it be written into the IEP. And also, if other agreements are reached, you may ask that they put that in writing also. Again, if it doesn't relate directly to that FAPE. They wouldn't necessarily have to, but we encourage it because, again, it's a way of rebuilding and building trust between the team members. The other thing is if they won't put something in writing to you, as a parent, you can always send back an email or something stating, you know, on such and such a date, we had a meeting. It was my understanding, you know, whatever your understanding was, and inform them if that's not the same understanding you had, please contact me within 5 business days. Otherwise, this is what I anticipate happening. So you as a parent that are taking that step to make that clarification, because again, you don't want to sign something if you're not in agreement with it. And so that would be one way to do it. Again, if you need assistance with organizing and keeping your child's special education paperwork manageable, check into our special education record keeping folder, because that's always a good place to keep that informal information. Okay, conciliation conferences. This is the one particular process that is specific to Minnesota. Minnesota is the only state that offers a conciliation, well, I shouldn't say even offers, has the availability of a conciliation conference if a parent requests. So if you've received a prior written notice and an IEP that you're in disagreement with, you can go ahead and have one of those informal meetings like we just talked about. Or as a parent, you do have the right to request, and you do need to request a conciliation conference. And what a conciliation conference is, it typically will include a higher level of administrative staff. Typically, your child's IEP case manager is going to conduct the conference, conduct the IEP meetings. When we get to conciliation, we're talking disagreements. And so very often the supervising staff, whether it's a coordinator for the district or the director of special education themselves, are going to participate in a conciliation conference. Okay. So it doesn't require an entire IEP team, but it does need someone who has the authority to make changes or resolve disagreements. The nice thing about bringing in administrative staff is they may have some additional resources that can be accessed if needed. So a conciliation conference has to be held within 10 calendar days of a parent request. Make your request in writing, and it's at no cost to either party. Within 5 school days after the final conciliation conference, because sometimes it may take 2 meetings, the district must provide you with a written memorandum describing what the district's final proposed offer of services is. This may include changes to the IEP and another parent consent form. So a couple little tips we have with conciliation conferences. You know, ask when you're going to receive your written memorandum following the conciliation, especially if it's during the summer or when school isn't in session. According to the law, it needs to be within 5 school days. So if school is out for a day, or the weekend, those aren't school days. So that may make a difference in when you receive that. So nothing wrong with asking for it when you'll get it. It can also provide the opportunity to look more specifically at the issue or issues of concern and give you the opportunity for further discussion if you're not in complete agreement with it. Conciliation conference is something that if a parent requests PACER advocate, the advocate will have a discussion with the parent and determine if there's a role for the advocate at that meeting. So it may be a meeting that an advocate could assist you at. Okay, so again, I just want to stress conciliation specifically to Minnesota. Parents need to request. We strongly encourage the request to be in writing. Okay. We'll move on now to mediation. As you can see on the PowerPoint there, it's voluntary for both parties, so everybody has to agree to participate, no cost. A neutral party, a neutral mediator is assigned by the Minnesota Department of Education, Compliance and Assistance. And that person's role, typically when we're looking at mediation, before I get into their role, we've been disagreeing about something. Maybe we've tried conciliation, but we just aren't getting anywhere. So we sometimes need that impartial third party to help us as a team because we're in disagreement and we're not moving forward. So anytime we're talking about identifying if a child is a child with a disability or evaluation, educational placement, a manifestation determination, or again, that provision of FAPE, we may want to have that impartial person be assigned. And so the Minnesota Department of Education has an actual form that schools or parents, well, both parties end up completing, but either parents or the school can request it. They'll assign this neutral mediator, and the role of the mediator is to help facilitate the process. Sometimes we're in such disagreement that communication is just shut down. And so that facilitator is able to help with that communication process. Sometimes even found that they help find common ground. There's someone with a new perspective on things because they don't know all the history that you've gone through. And so they may be able to come up with some other options or some solutions for the team to consider. So they're there to help reach some mutually agreeable resolutions. If agreements are reached through this process, then the mediator writes up those agreements, and then once approved by parents in the school, that then becomes a binding document. One of the nice things with mediation is, sometimes you can look outside the law a little bit and be a little bit more creative again on how mediation can help resolve the situations. So mediation can also be used in lieu of or instead of a resolution session when we're talking about a due process complaint. And again, this is one of those meetings that if a parent requests, a PACER advocate can assist with mediation. And what we do is help you prepare, help you organize what are your concerns, what are some options we might be looking at. But whatever the situation, you as a parent have a right to request that a PACER advocate. Also in our publications that I've got listed for you is something called a checklist, preparing for and attending mediation, that just kind of walks you through the process and helps you be able to prepare. Also, so you know, and we just had it approved today by the Department of Education, so it's not included in the packet, but in a week or so, I'm sure if you go on our website, we're going to have a new publication called Checklist, Preparing for Conciliation Conference. So you might want to check that out and print out a copy of it. But again, mediation, I have found has been an extremely helpful process. I think in the last report I wrote, it was like 89 to 90% of mediations have reached written agreements that a PACER advocate has participated in. So it is a very, very successful process. It's not going to work in every situation, and that's okay. Not everything works all the time, but it is an option that you have. Another option is something called a facilitated team meeting. You know, the school or parents can request a facilitated team meeting. Let's just say we've had 2 or 3, maybe 4 meetings, and we're just not reaching agreement. Maybe it's we don't agree on the behavior interventions that are being put in the behavior plan, or maybe it's the accommodations that are listed and you don't feel anyone is being held accountable for it. And so again, you don't want to sign an IEP that you're not in agreement with. And so by requesting a facilitated team meeting, what happens here is that, again, a neutral facilitator is assigned by the Minnesota Department of Education. Again, no cost to parent or the school. And that facilitator is there to help promote communication and try and get things resolved. Typically, you know, the IEP is written during a facilitated team meeting, which again can be really helpful in the trust building process. You know, they may post it up on a screen and actually sit and wordsmith the specific wording for a goal so that everybody sees this is how, you know, this is our starting point, our baseline. This is where we expect the child to be in that 1-year period. So it's written there. Everybody can agree to it at that time and move forward. Again, like I said, it may be 1 or 2 topics on the IEP. It may be the entire IEP. It all depends upon the circumstances. But the outcome of a facilitated team meeting would be that we have an IEP that the school and parents agree is appropriate and that you as the parent are comfortable signing. So oftentimes they'll request you sign it at the facilitated meeting. What you need to know is you do still have your 14 calendar days to decide if you agree or disagree. So if you're comfortable with it, sure, go ahead and sign it at the meeting. Otherwise, just inform them, you know, I need to take it home. I want to review it again by myself, and I will make a determination within my 14 calendar days. So another publication that is in your packet there is Preparing for a Facilitated Meeting. And this again is one of those meetings that if you feel the need for the support from an advocate, please call, talk with an advocate. And if it's determined that an advocate is needed at that meeting, they could assist you with that. We know many parents out there are very capable of going to meetings without us and just need the support of us saying, hey, here's your rights, here's what you need to do. But if you're a parent who needs that extra support, you let us know. Okay, we're gonna move. Oh, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Going back to the process of mediation, we have
Okay.
a question on that. Can you resolve disputes over tuition reimbursements through mediation?
Very good question. If you're talking about having placed your child in a private school and then requesting that the school district reimburse you, it's something that can be addressed. I think there have been situations, in fact, yeah, I know I've been involved in some situations where through the mediation process, private tutors were reimbursed. And in one situation, yeah, it was a tuition. But again, it's going to depend upon the situation and if proper steps were processed. And so, yeah, you could address that through mediation. And the other option would be through a due process complaint, which we're gonna talk about next. So in answering the question, it depends upon the situation, but it possibly could be. Okay. So we're going to move on here then to due process complaints and hearings. When we're actually talking about a due process complaint, this is something that may ultimately go before an administrative law judge from the Office of Administrative Hearings. So if you feel your child hasn't received what they should have received, or especially if you feel your child hasn't received that FAPE, free appropriate public education, that would be a situation where you could file a due process complaint, which initially would get filed with the Minnesota Department of Education, and that request needs to be in writing. And when you present that complaint to the Department of Education, you also need to provide a copy of the complaint to the school district. The Department of Education then will forward that request to the Office of Administrative Hearings and a law judge. And then they're going to determine if the case has standing. And if so, then it would go to a hearing. So there's a process that goes with this. Anytime a due process complaint is filed by a parent, there needs to be an attempt to resolve the issue prior to it going to a hearing. And you may have heard the terminology of a resolution session. So if both parties agree, this resolution meeting, resolution session would happen within 15 calendar days of the time you as a parent filed that complaint. Now, what you need to know is that session may be waived if both parties agree, or you may use the mediation process that I talked about earlier in lieu of that resolution session. If through that resolution session agreement is reached, then it's written up and signed by all parties. That then would become a legally binding document. If after 30 days of the resolutions period, which it's a 30-day resolution period, if that complaint is not resolved, then a due process hearing may occur. So if you aren't able to resolve through resolution meeting, whether you're using mediation or the resolution period itself, then it would go to a hearing officer who would make a determination as to whether or not it went to a hearing. So a hearing officer, if it does go to a hearing officer is going to make the final decision. And what you need to know as a parent is that the district will usually have an attorney if it goes to a hearing, and we encourage you to do so also. We are not attorneys at Pacer, but we do have some resources available if you do need them. So a final decision then, if it goes to a hearing, a final decision by the hearing officer is made within 45 calendar days after the expiration of the 30-day resolution period. So there is an appeal process that's available to both parties if they're not satisfied with the final decision. And it's a complicated process. I had mentioned earlier that if parents requested the due process complaint or filed the due process complaint, that's how the process goes. There has to be that resolution period. If for some reason it's the school district that is filing the due process complaint, they don't have to go through that process because Minnesota Department of Education stated that they feel the school has already utilized their options before they've filed a complaint. So if there are additional questions on due process complaints and hearings, additional information on that, you can call and speak with an advocate, or MDE, the Minnesota Department of Education website, has a lot more information, and you can talk with someone in the compliance and assistance section there.
Pat, here's
Yes.
one question that just came in. Is the complaint, the due process complaint, filed at the state, at the Minnesota Department of Education, and is the hearing officer from the Minnesota Department of Education?
Okay, the complaint goes to the Minnesota Department of Education, who then forwards that on to the Office of Administrative Hearings, and an administrative law judge at the Office of Administrative Hearings is who's going to make that determination. So the decision does not get made at the Minnesota Department of Education. It will go to an actual court hearing where a hearing officer is assigned. Okay, I hope that answered that question. If not, again, like I said, give us a call or contact MDE for some additional information on that. Okay, and just so you know that with the due process complaints, the Minnesota Department of Education reported that in last year, of the 24 complaints brought to them, only one of them actually went to a hearing. So through this resolution process, a lot of the issues can resolve. And when you think about it, it's saving a lot of money for everybody because attorneys are expensive. But if there are some other options that haven't been discussed, they may come up during that resolution session so that the issues can get resolved. Okay, if we're ready, we're gonna move on to the next one here, where we talk about a state complaint. Now, this is a complaint that is filed, again, with the Minnesota Department of Education. Anyone who feels that their child's IEP has not been following or not being followed, or that they're not providing appropriate services for your child, or that another example is that the data doesn't support that your child is making progress and you don't see any changes happening. You as a parent have a right to file a complaint with the Minnesota Department of Education. Once it's received by the Department of Education, they have 60 days to resolve the issue, make a determination. Frequently, they may ask for an extension. Maybe they have to research things a little more. But what typically happens is once it's assigned to a complaint investigator, the complaint investigator is going to get a hold of the parents, get a hold of the school, ask questions, review information, look at the data, and make a determination. If it is determined that your child's rights in the special ed process have been violated, there may be some corrective actions that the Department of Education would then write up in a formal complaint decision. Many times we find that it gets sent back to the IEP to retake a look at things and see if there are some other options of things that haven't been tried. But again, if the Department of Education's investigator determines that yes, there was a violation, then corrective actions will be taken and specific timelines are given that the school may have to meet. So we have a publication, and I think it's included. If not, you can find it online called Filing a Complaint with the Minnesota Department of Education that can assist a parent in the process. Also, advocates are available to talk about it. Many times we can help with the wording and help you look at what is the real issue and determine what is it we need to file this complaint on. And MDE, the Minnesota Department of Education, also has more information on their website too. So frequently we're asked, can a complaint and mediation be requested at the same time? Or if a complaint investigation and a due process complaint are requested, what happens then? Well, typically the complaint then is going to go on hold until either the mediation or the hearing has been resolved. And then if there are still issues, you can reopen that complaint with the Department of Education. So if it doesn't get resolved one way or the other, you still have the option of going back to that complaint. Okay, then we're gonna move on to a discrimination complaint. Anyone who's familiar with PACER's website may know that previously this was probably listed more as 504 complaints, but with everything that's going on in the world these days, we've decided we needed to expand this a little bit. So as it says up there, a discrimination complaint can be filed against any agency receiving federal funds. So anytime you think that your child with or without a disability is being discriminated on based on race, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, familial status, age, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Those are areas that discrimination complaints can be filed on. So a person must, when we're talking about disability, a person must meet that state definition of having a disability under the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. And what that says is disability means any condition or characteristic that renders a person as a disabled person. A disabled person is any person who, one, has a physical, sensory, or mental impairment which materially limits one or more major life activities. Two, has a record of such an impairment, or number three, is regarded as having such an impairment. So you don't really even need a medical diagnosis if they're regarded as having an impairment. So interesting. So this may include students with 504 plans or IEPs or a general ed student. So if a complaint is filed with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, it's going to be assigned to an investigator. If they determine it needs to be forwarded to the Office of Civil Rights, they would forward that on for you. The Minnesota Department of Education has absolutely no authority to investigate discrimination complaints. So when it comes to a discrimination complaint, again, whether it's with or without a disability, parents have the options of, file a complaint, ask what your school district's policy is for filing a complaint. So you could file it with your local school district. You also have the option, as I said, of filing with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, or you also as a parent can go directly to the Office of Civil Rights, the region office for Minnesota, which is in Chicago. That information, the location for the Department of Human Rights and for the Office of Civil Rights will soon be posted on our website, as we've been doing some significant revisions to the dispute resolution resources and information. So you can also call and a PACER advocate can connect you or provide you with the contact information for each of those offices. So additional information on filing those complaints can be obtained by contacting us, and speak with an advocate or any one of those organizations. Your school should have a posting as to who the responsible person is. So if you can't find that posted on their website, you may want to go directly to the superintendent and ask them who is the person we would file this complaint with, and how do we go about that? Okay, so we've talked a lot about effective communication within the special ed process and parents' options, the options that you have on resolving disagreements. But the one thing we haven't addressed yet that I want to touch on today is how to restore trust when it's been broken. Because unfortunately, when we've been in disagreement and conflict, the trust between everybody sometimes gets severed. So that's what we're going to talk about now. We started out today talking about partnership. It's a partnership between us and the schools. And so in order to be effective partners, we need to have trust. So the first step in restoring trust is that people need to acknowledge the fact it's been broken. There's nothing wrong, and I encourage you to let them know. I've seen issues come up, even the question that came up earlier about, they said, trust the process. Well, you know what, as a parent, the process has slapped me in the face a few times. I don't know that I trust it. So what are we going to do about that? We need to take a look at, making sure we define things in writing, even the smallest steps or actions. Accountability, that's going to build trust. So maybe writing a clarification letter following meetings as to, this was my understanding of what's going to happen next. Clarification is absolutely going to help build trust because everybody needs to be on the same page. Holding individuals accountable for the follow through. We talked earlier about who's going to be responsible to do this. When will I see that in writing? When will we have our next meeting to review that information? That's why those questions are so important. By getting those answers and that accountability, you're going to help restore that trust. Getting things in writing, Pacer's philosophy has always been, if it isn't in writing, it doesn't exist. If the school won't put it in writing for you, you learned the skill today of how to put it back in writing to them. So it's really important. It's that accountability. Set dates for steps or actions to be accomplished. Review the plan and take responsibility for steps and following through with what you as a parent can do. Supporting at home what the school is doing can be a real big impact on your child. First of all, if your child sees you and the school on the same page, I think you're going to get more accountability from your child too. So just keep that in mind. If you have questions about something, ask for clarification. Don't sign something you don't agree with. Again, remember that not signing something doesn't tell the school you don't agree. So you get your prior written notice and your parent consent form. It has 2 or 3 boxes. One box says, yes, I agree, and give the district permission. One box says, no, I don't agree. School can't move forward with that. Some districts have a box that says, I agree with some, but I disagree with this. And then you list what your things are. Then it has your signature at the bottom. If you check the box that says, yes, I agree, sign it and date it, they're going to move forward. If you check the box that says no, sign it and date it, they have to stop. Verbally, if you tell them, no, I don't agree, they shouldn't be moving forward. But that parent consent form is really important, and especially as we look at ongoing IEPs. I mentioned earlier, with an initial or the very first IEP, they can't move forward with that plan until you're in agreement and they have your written permission. Any subsequent IEPs or proposals, once the school sends that, you have 14 calendar days from the day they send it to you to agree or disagree. So if you are in disagreement, it's imperative that you write you disagree, sign it, date it, and get it back within that 14 calendar days. Otherwise, it could go into effect on day 15, whether you agree with it or not. So again, that is just a really important step and process that I want to make sure you're clear about. So by following these things, trust can be rebuilt. It's not going to happen overnight, but sometimes we need to start with those baby steps and let's get things in writing. Let's all agree that this is what we're going to do, and then see how that goes from that point on. Okay. And ultimately, as a team coming together in the best interest of your child, that's what you are. You're all going to bring your own special gifts and understanding of the child to the table. And again, what you see at home and what they see at school may be two totally different things. So make sure everybody is aware of what's going on. And you as parents, you know your child better than anyone else. Again, as educational professionals, they bring their skills to teach children. You may not always agree, but you do need to keep the relationship by working together in the best interest of your child. Together, by sharing the knowledge that everyone has, your child's going to receive an appropriate education to help them move forward on their journey. So together as a team, we can make it happen. Okay, that is what I had to present to you today. I just want to thank you all for joining us. Please remember that in about an hour from now, you'll be getting a link with an evaluation, a survey to give us some feedback on how this information came across to you today. It was a lot of information. So, let it sink in. If you have questions, call us, email us. But please complete that evaluation. And then also a certificate of attendance. There's going to be a link to receive one of those, because I know many of you will need that information. But our contact information is here on the screen. And again, this is a presentation that's going to be posted to our website. And again, if you have questions, call us, talk with an advocate. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today. Have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.